Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Psi Stream. Today, we're going to be covering a really important topic, one that has been asked us to discuss several times now. And so we feel that this is kind of we actually timed this perfectly. We really wanted to make sure we discuss PTSD before the 4th of July. And it might seem a little obvious to some folks, but to those who are new to understanding, PTSD, they might not quite understand, what happens when the 4th of July comes around for people who have it. It's not just exclusively for veterans, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But before we get started, I want to introduce myself. My name is Matt Bergendahl. I'm a licensed clinician. I kind of bring my experiences of working with the veteran population, and I myself being a veteran, to our Psi streams in my background, and then we have the experiences and work that I've done here with Stack Up. So that's kind of a little bit of quick intro about myself. I would like to now introduce Hannah. Go ahead and take it away and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hey, so I'm Hannah Stiller. I have a master's degree in trauma and, counseling. So trauma and crisis is my specialty, and I am working on my doctorate. And while I do all that, I am also a public speaker. I do blogging. I do a lot of publications. If you are on our social media, all the stuff that's original work that you see, that's original memes, that's blogs, stuff like that, that is actually all written by me.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and I manage all of our social media. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're ever wanting to engage in social media, you're most likely talking to me. If you ever want to talk to Matt directly, let me know. I'll send him over a message and he'll hop on and talk to you as well. But yeah, so my experience is mostly in education. I did do some work in clinical before I decided to go back and get my doctorate, which anybody who's ever gotten a doctorate knows that that is pretty much a full-time job
Yeah.
if you are going to get straight A's, like I do. Just saying.
No.
And so, yeah, I know. Sorry, throwing out a little bit of a brag there. And so yeah, while I'm doing that, I'm doing this. And just a little side note in case I forget at the end of the stream, as I tend to do. I am going to be starting some of my own original videos. These videos are not going to be anything related to Psi streams. It's all going to be based on my actual blogs that I do. So the content is, you might see some similar themes, but the content is going to be very separate from what we do here. So I'm hoping, and the reason I'm saying this out loud is because if I put it out there, I'll actually get off my booty and do it and stop, procrastinating. So I'm hoping that in July, by July, I'm going to have at least one or two videos starting to get put up. They're just going to be on my YouTube. We'll be linking tons of stuff. We have a Twitter, we have a Facebook, and then I have my own Facebook, my own Twitter personally. Matt has his own Twitter and his own Facebook. And then I even have an Instagram for my business, as well as like a Pinterest and Reddit. Like, I mean, I'm all over social media. So if you ever want to check us out or see anything that we do or I do or Matt does, please check us out on any of those platforms, because if you see one of our content, you'll be able to get linked to any of our other content. So it's really easy. I try to keep everything integrated and as transitionable as possible. So yeah, so that's me. And bringing into this subject, we talked last week about, or not last week, last stream, 2 weeks ago. It seems like last week, about trauma and what
Mm-hmm.
caused it. And
Yes.
during those streams, we're very honest and open about kind of our own experiences as hosts. And Matt, shared some of his experiences with being military and some of the things he went through as far as being a cancer survivor. And then I kind of bring a different perspective of having experienced childhood abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure before we get started, there's huge trigger warnings, just like we did
Yes.
on last stream. We are going to possibly be talking about stuff we've gone through. We are possibly going to be talking about situations that might hit somebody very personally.
Yep.
We are most likely not going to be reading out every single message that we get on the Twitch channel the discussions. We're
Mm-hmm.
probably not going to be reading all of those, especially if they are more private in nature. The reason for that is for a few reasons. First off, I would like to turn these into podcasts, and I would prefer not to have all this information out to everybody else in the world. If you were only okay with this content being seen on Twitch live, when it gets moved to our YouTube, or when it gets moved to my website, or when it gets moved to our Facebook, or wherever else we share it, we change it into a podcast. I don't want what you said to be necessarily broadcast to all of those different platforms if
Yeah.
that's not something you were okay with originally. The second reason is because, we in general, we respect your privacy,
Absolutely.
even here on stream, and maybe something that you're saying, you say it so people in chat can hear, but maybe you don't want us to respond to it directly. And so we want to respect you. We want to respect us. We want to respect all the other people who are watching, and make sure that this is a very safe and comfortable environment to be having a conversation, especially while we are doing these very difficult and tough topics. And
Yep.
Matt and you and I have talked, right? We're going to be doing a lot of tough topics in the future.
Yes.
But I don't know. This one is very personal,
Yep.
and is something that has so much taboo around it still.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about trauma, people they don't like to listen to it. And so that's what we're doing. We're talking about it, and we're breaking that taboo by being like, yeah, hey, I'm a victim of abuse. I was abused as a child. And that's something that I can own, and I can say, hey, this is my experience,
Mm-hmm.
so that all those others out there, who are maybe watching this or listening to it in the future, can go, wait, it's not as uncommon, it's not weird, it's not taboo.
Right.
So that's a disclaimer as far as the video. I know that Matt is going to have more stuff to say about our disclaimer as far as the channel.
Right. Thank you. And again, we are always looking for people to engage with us, interact, share what you feel comfortable with, disclose what you feel comfortable with. And just really, if you've got questions, that's what we're here for. We're not here to talk to like other psychologists. We're here to talk to everybody, and we want to make sure that what we're delivering to you makes sense. And if you have questions, we're gonna just ask, and that's what we're gonna do. Well, last stream we had a lot of really good questions when we were talking about trauma, and I really hope that today's stream, when we talk about PTSD, will be just as engaging as it was last 2 weeks ago. So with that being said, like I said, we're going to be talking about some pretty hard-hitting stuff. Here at Stack Up, the people who are hosting our streams, they run a program called the Stop Program, where it is a 24/7 RAND. There you go, right above your head. 24/7 crisis intervention program. So if in the moment when we're discussing some of these things, if you start to feel that buildup of anxiety or stress or something like that, you feel like you're being triggered, by all means, please. Oh, thank you, Bewitch, and I appreciate you doing that. There's the link right there. Hit it. They'll get you set up and taken care of. They're not a counseling service either, but they can do is help you refocus, reorientate yourself, and get you maybe in the right direction. If it looks like you need some referrals to like a mental health professional in your area, or whatever it is that you need, they can definitely be there to help.
Absolutely, yeah, and they're great. I'm sometimes in the chat as well. So I've seen firsthand some of the stuff that they do, and I'm not actually associated with Stack Up. I am my own person, although I do support them 100%, and I think that they're great. So yeah, check them out, because if you're having a hard time, especially during our streams, it's so easy just to take that little click, just scroll up, click on that link that we just posted, and you can head on over there and talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, this is. We're professionals, and even we have been
try to
talking
be
this week and going, hey, wow, PTSD, this is so emotional just for us. But we're literally have been trained of how to deal with these things, and we've been to therapy, and we, or even ongoing with therapy. So this is something that even in our own lives, we have to take a step back from and say, some of
Yes.
these topics are a little tough, and so and that's us. So out there, we do completely understand if you need to take a break and talk to somebody, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not an easy
Absolutely.
topic, and I'm not pulling any punches on this. So
Well,
sorry.
I think what's really important, and I'm going to be completely blunt, when I was doing my program, my master's program, our professors were always saying, and just stick with me on this story, they're always saying, never disclose, don't talk about your own personal stuff, and just keep your mouth shut. And I was like, okay, well, I can see that when it comes to clients, but I'm not talking to any clients. I'm just talking to other folks. So I can kind of take off that mask or that hat and say, I have no problems talking about now my own battles. And through the streams and talking to the folks out here in the stream and talking to Hannah, I started to realize that I really need to take some sort of ownership of what the PTSD has done in my life. And my PTSD came from being in Iraq. I was there during the beginning of the war. It has had, it has had a tremendous impact on my life. And of course, I myself, had identified that I need to go and get help. I can't do this on my own. PTSD is a real son of a bitch. And so it's time for me to just take care of it. And when I got hit with leukemia, uh, the cancer itself has been known to cause people PTSD. So it's like a double whammy for me. So and full disclosure here, I've got no problems. I actually am going to counseling right now to deal with my PTSD and get it under a controlled situation where I need it to be so I can, you know, be the best person that I can be. And it's all about that self-care. We've talked about that several episodes ago. The importance of taking care of yourself before you can take care of others. And as a counselor, that's what I owe to my clients. I need to be in the sort of space and sort of mindset where I know I can be there for them. And that all boils down to, in one area, of ethics. Um,
We're
yeah,
all about ethics.
ethics, absolutely ethics. So let's go ahead and jump into this. We're going to keep looking at the chat, folks. Um, I see what you're saying, Twiz, and obviously I'm very happy that you did not go that route, and you went and you did the right thing. You went and got help, and that those are the stories that we need to hear, not just
Exactly.
in this stream, but everywhere. When we start talking about it more and more and more, the less stigmatizing it becomes, the less taboo it is to talk about it, and it becomes something where a person can feel comfortable with disclosing to their friends or to the world, hey, I need help. I
Yeah.
need help, and I
Hmm.
can't do this on my own. But we'll, like I said, we got a lot of stuff to cover today.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about.
But I want to make sure though that if we do have a lot to cover, but we are also 100% fine that if any of our topics need to be carried over to another day,
Yes.
this is going to be an ongoing thing. I know that one of the things we're probably not going to be covering today is some stuff with vicarious trauma,
Mm-hmm.
even though we talked about trauma in last stream having to do with our first responders. That's not something we're going to be covering today. So if we don't get to a topic that you are interested in or that you are passionate about or that you want to learn more, just send us over a message. We're always available on all of my wonderful all of my social media, any of them. You can just send me a message and I'll make sure to add it to the list of things to talk about later, because this is going to be a topic we're going to unfortunately and fortunately that we actually know enough about it to make it multiple episodes long, but unfortunately that we have to have these situations that need to be talked about. But we will be talking about multiple stuff in the future,
Mm-hmm.
so just bear with us. And if we will get to what we can get to today, and then we'll see where we go from there.
And Twiz, I appreciate you jumping in there and talking about how you have worked with it. Um, it isn't. It's hard to admit. I mean, and those who who have a strong sense of independence and a strong sense of trying to figure things out on their own are going to be having a hard time, admitting that they need help. And then, of course, the military, if you are a veteran or if you are active duty, we were taught that we need to be self-sustaining. We need to be able to figure out these issues on our own. But let me point this out, and I want to get this started before we really jump in there. And I hope everyone who's listening and hearing me out understands what I mean when I say this. PTSD is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Okay?
Absolutely.
So what I'm trying to tell you is that overall PTSD is just basically a way for your brain, your body, to try and preserve your life. But unfortunately, it does have some extreme stuff that comes in associated with it. So Hannah,
And I would like to add
yeah,
that one of the things that I've been seeing a lot lately that I think is great is that we're starting to say that PTSD is an injury, not an illness.
right.
So when you are in a car accident, you might have injuries, um, both mentally and physically. When you are a veteran who has seen combat, you might have injuries mentally and physically. And those mental injuries are PTSD. That's what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. Some of the stuff that goes with it, some of our more extreme anxiety disorders, those things are injuries based on something that we've been through. And one of the reasons I love that is that it kind of takes it away from being like this illness, like something that, you did to yourself or
Mm-hmm.
something that is more abstract that you can't see. This is something we can see. We can see the impact of PTSD. We can see the impact of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so important, coming from, child abuse situation and
Mm-hmm.
having been a survivor. And everyone always asks, well, you say survivor, you were a victim. No, I'm a survivor of child
Yep.
abuse because it was something that could have killed me. It's something that nearly killed me on multiple occasions. Whether it was during the actual abuse, having my life physically in danger, or whether it was psychologically, me having severe depression, suicidal ideations, all of that. Either way, I was able to come through that and kind of survive all of it. So I like to say I am a child abuse survivor,
Mm-hmm.
not a victim, and then changing that mind frame of that this is an injury that I've had. And a lot of ways I don't want to say that I have healed from my injury because I mean, even over the last probably 9 months, there's been some stuff that's happened in my life that have actually re-triggered some PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some things that have been really tough. Those are things that I'll probably talk about in my blog or future videos. I don't want to bore everybody here unless it becomes relevant. But I've had some even different things that have come up, and so I mean, it doesn't always necessarily completely go away. We just kind of learn to manage it a little better, and I feel that at this point, I've learned to manage it really, really, really well. But even somebody like that, I'm still this last year has been tough and has brought up some PTSD that you know I'm also going to be going and seeing a therapist soon once I find one in my area that I like. It's a recent decision I made. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also important to point out um, that everybody has a different approach to PTSD, and that includes clinicians, psychologists, social workers, um, and one thing that I've done a lot of research on PTSD. Obviously, I have a personal invested interest, but also I am very very if I hadn't become a counselor, I would have been in doing research,
Mm-hmm.
and more specifically, the plasticity of the brain. And that's a really boring word, but basically, and I want to explain this a little bit because it's important. Your brain can actually certain parts of the brain can shrink, and certain parts of the brain can grow, and it's kind of like it's obviously living, but it's going to grow and shrink and grow and shrink in different spots, and it's never permanent. And I say that because, and we'll get to a slide later on down the road, and this is in connection with what Hannah was saying, that this is, the invisible wound, as some say. Parts of your brain changes with PTSD, and
I actually want to interrupt you. I'm sorry, I don't want to, but with child abuse, the brain actually changes permanently.
oh, it's permanent. Well, thank you.
It is a permanent change when you are, because of the fact that during child abuse you are exposed to repeated trauma. uh, as most abuse situation is, it can be one time, it can be a one time situation in child abuse, but with the physical abuse, especially when it is prolonged
Hmm.
over years or months. For instance, my the abuse I faced was literally from birth until the age of probably 19. And so during that time I was in a constant fight or flight, and that during those developmental years while your brain is actually developing, it
Hmm.
can actually have permanent changes within a child. And so this is not something that's going to go away. This is something that the only ways you can manage it is to form reconnections through some different types of therapy that we'll talk about either this stream or next stream. But yeah, I just want to make sure I put that
No,
out
that's
there.
good.
So
And
somebody who
yeah.
experiences adult trauma or one singular incident of trauma, which obviously in combat zones there's a mixture. Sometimes it's a single event, sometimes it is prolonged for months or even possibly years based on how long deployment is and all that. But those ones are a lot easier to change back than something like an abuse situation that happened during the times of the development of the brain, which is why it's so important that people understand what child abuse looks like. Because the earlier you are able to get a child out of that situation or give them support and help, the sooner you're able to make those changes and kind of stop some of those things from happening. I mean, obviously, it's the same even in adulthood, is that the sooner you start to address the trauma, obviously, the better. But
Hmm.
with children, most of the time, I mean, I got out of it about 19, so 19 straight years of abuse. And then it wasn't until I was probably 23 or 24 before I actually started realizing I had PTSD.
And let's just bring this up too, for those who are just joining us. This is the reason why having Hannah with us on these side streams is so important, because she brings the other perspective. I often just talk about the adults when it comes to mental health. That's because that's my experiences is with dealing, or not dealing, is working with adults and what they're going through, and veterans and their loved ones and their friends and stuff. That's what I bring to the table. Hannah brings to the table her, not only her education, but her work experiences and her own personal experiences as well. So and so often you'll see me talking, and I'm really only looking and or visualizing the older population, the adults, the veterans, and stuff like that. So this kind of brings some really good temperance here. So let's go ahead and change gears. Okay, okay. What I would like to talk about is just kind of start talking about the symptoms, or
Yeah.
what you might start to experience when you have PTSD. In fact, here we go. We've got a couple of good points in here. I want to bring up in chat. Um, okay, we got anonymous. Sorry, my best friend struggles with PTSD, and I never know how to help or a good thing to say. Well, you know what?
Absolutely, that's something we're going to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, we are going to talk
That's
about that,
important.
and I think it's great that you are taking the time out to be involved in this chat today, so that you can get a better understanding of PTSD and how you can reach out to them and support them through their things. I've always said that the symptoms of PTSD wax and wane, and when I say that waxing and waning, it means it's not always constant. You can
Mhm.
have 4 or 5 really good months where it's, the PTSD is really not influencing your day-to-day life, and then for
Yeah.
whatever reason it just comes back at you like a freaking hurricane, and you're like, whoa, what is causing this? And that could be for several different reasons. But like I said, getting back to it, we'll cover that.
Holidays,
Yes,
seasons,
yes, yes.
anniversaries,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things can trigger just an event. We had a comment about that you still can't spend more than 20 minutes in the store, and that's one of those things is, those triggers. So sometimes those triggers can be an annual thing, sometimes it can be an event, sometimes be in person, a place, a song.
Mm-hmm.
Triggers come in absolutely any format. So that's, I think, a really good point that, I think is, since it's being addressed right now, that I just want
Yes.
to say is that, yeah, triggers can be anything. A lot of the triggers can, I mean, it would surprise you what a trigger can be sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Literally anything.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's why the more people who chime in, the better, because everybody has a
Mhm.
different related experience. So I kind of kicked around the idea when I was kind of coming up with my material as far as what I wanted to talk about, and so I think, rather than me coming purely from academic or professional expressive expression, excuse me, I wanted to talk a little bit more about um, my experiences with PTSD. Oh, on Twitter, I am.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
hi.
Hi.
Somebody that's talked to us a lot on Twitter. So yeah, whenever you're talking, you're talking to me. That's run by me.
Yes,
So
not me.
hi.
I don't do that. I don't. I suck at that stuff. So let me give you my experiences when I started to see um, the very beginnings of PTSD for myself,
Love
because
it. Yeah,
these are
let's hear
some,
it.
and these are going to be some of the things that we are going to look out for when it comes to, if you're wondering, what do I have PTSD? Well, some really gnarly stuff happened when we were over there in Iraq, and there was two events where we, at least I thought we were going to die, and I won't go into any deep explanation because those are really long stories, but there were two really hairy occasions when we were there, and this is at the beginning of the war when it first kicked off. And anyhow, when we got back and we deploy as a fire team, there's only 13 of us, and we're all armed up and all this other great stuff. And we came home. Our families, welcomed us, and it really was trying to get reacclimated to being back with my family. My son was just 2 weeks old when I left for this last deployment, and I had this new kid that didn't even look like the kid I left. I almost was joking, like, "Did you swap kids on me when I was gone and deployed?" But anyhow, what I started to recognize was, first of all, really, really bad nightmares, really
Mhm.
strong and vivid nightmares of being back over there, being, in those events over again. And then I had this really strong sense of being hyper vigilant, and that's another thing. That's another word to look out for: the hyper vigilance. I
Yes.
felt that I could not have any of my blinds uh, open at night. I didn't want anybody to see in my house when I can't see them. Because when it's dark like that, if you don't have perimeter lighting, you just can't see what's going on out there. So I always had to go into the house and check all the blinds, make sure all of them were closed, and then I would feel secure. Oh, and also check the doors to make sure that they're locked. So that is a really, my best example for myself as far as the hypervigilance goes. And then it started to bleed into other areas like the temperament. I was really just on edge and just pissed off all the time. Really different person than I am today, but I didn't acknowledge it, and uh, I was just really. I was a senior airman. I was about to go become a staff sergeant. I was about to get my own troops that I had to take care of, and I just felt overwhelmed with all of this and trying to just cope. And so it wasn't until 6 months later that I really truly started to experience the full blown effect of PTSD. But I didn't know at the time that I had it. I was just
Mhm.
felt like I was just in a funk. I was pissed off all the time, bad sleep, nightmares, all that stuff, and it was really interesting. And I don't want to. I want to make sure that we got time for other stuff, but I'm just going to quickly say this. What
Oh no,
hit?
please take your time. You're giving so much information. I'm
Yeah,
I'm loving this.
what really hit me the biggest, and this was crazy. I had I remember if I knew I was going to have 3 days off, I would buy like a bottle of Bacardi. I would jump on my computer, and when the family went to sleep, I was playing video games, and I was just playing games. And so while I was waiting for my computer to boot up, it was a Macintosh. It was my first computer. I was watching 2020.
I won't look down on you for that.
I know. I don't have Macs anymore. They're gone. And I was watching 2020, and I'll never forget it. It was this couple, and the male was a veteran. He had dark hair, dark complexion, and he was sitting on the couch with his wife, and he finally started disclosing what he started to experience and being PTSD. And he said it. And what really, I was kind of pouring myself a drink, kind of listening to 2020. And he said, when I have to check the perimeter of my house and close all the blinds and make sure everything's locked, it really grabbed my attention. And I was listening to it. And finally, I was just straight up watching it. And I was still in the military at this time. And I said to myself, oh shit, is this what's going on? And it was just kind of an eye opener, and I was denying it for the longest time. But after watching this episode of 2020, made me realize that there is really something going on there that I was not prepared for, and there was no way I can try and deal with it on my own. And for me, I had to wait until I got out of the military, because of the job that I had, I would have lost my security clearance. I probably would have lost my certifications to the jobs that I do, because I carried a weapon. I was always carrying weapons, and they obviously are not going to want you carrying a weapon if they perceive you as being a threat to yourself or others. And so
Yeah.
I just kept my mouth shut until I got out. But I never, in a million years, thought that I had PTSD until I watched that 2020. I just thought what I was doing was normal. You know, hey, everybody wants to make sure that nobody can look in and check their locks and all that stuff. But I came to realize that no, a lot of people don't think about that stuff. And what I was doing was a reaction to the traumatic events that happened in Iraq. And so that's what I talk about to you today and to the audience, as far as what to look for. The hypervigilance, the easily startled response, not being comfortable being in crowded areas. I mean, there's just so many examples that we can give. I see a lot of talking here going in chat.
Yeah, I don't want to read those out loud, though. I've been keeping up on it. We definitely appreciate those comments, but these are the comments that I just respect your privacy, and I just don't want those to be dealt with. But yeah, 100%. I love that you relate to Matt's story. I love that you're being open and honest about some of the stuff. Essentially, just for those who are able to hear and not able to see in our future, broadcasts, it's just somebody who is expressing similarities to what Matt has gone through, and is saying it hits very close to home, and giving some examples of how that has affected this person's life and the way that the similarities are happening.
I really appreciate it for you to jumping in there and talking. But enough about me, Hannah. What would you like to start covering with?
Well, I mean, I actually love the way that you went with this, is giving actual examples of PTSD, because you really hit pretty much all of them, kind of in a row of just what PTSD looks like. So if you don't mind, I think I'll share kind of my experience with that as well, and then just kind of break it down with each step of it. So, I knew I had experienced trauma. This wasn't something that I was unaware of. I was completely aware of what I was going through and how it was going to affect me. Again, this was 19 straight years of abuse. So I was not delusional to think that this wasn't going to have some sort of impact. I had heard things, and this is one of those interesting things about PTSD, is that whenever we talk about PTSD, and this is not to put down the military, because the military is an organization that has it the absolute most. More of the population in the military has it than any other population. So it is a good thing that we are shining the light on our military personnel and the PTSD and the trauma that they're experiencing. However, on the flip side of it is it means that some of the other areas of trauma people aren't associated with things like PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, I was 23, 22 or 23 when I actually started going to therapy, and I had started going to therapy because I had gotten married. I was having just a really hard time with just anxiety. I was constantly anxious. I was having full out panic attacks. There would be days that I would just suddenly be in the bathroom, just literally shaking back and forth, not
Mm-hmm.
able to catch my breath, not able to
Mm-hmm.
breathe. And I didn't know what that had to do with. Again, this is not something I had never heard of PTSD. I had never even heard of anxiety disorders.
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard of anything that was long lasting associated with child abuse. I had only heard that child abuse is bad because you can start to be an abuser yourself, or you can start to abuse substances.
Mm-hmm.
And so I avoid drinking. Even to this day, I barely drink. I've never done drugs. I will be 100% honest about that. I don't do anything just because I'm so afraid. I've got two alcoholics in my family. Both my mother and my father are alcoholics, and my mother was also a drug addict. And my dad was a drug dealer, so fun little story there.
Wow.
You can see how the wonderful love story happened. Anyways, so yeah, I don't touch any of that stuff, and I thought that was good enough. I thought that if I just stayed away from substances, then I was going to be a perfectly well-adjusted adult. If I never hit my kids, then I was awesome. If I didn't marry a man who hit me, I was doing even better. And I had stayed away from substances. I married a good man who never laid a hand on me. I figured, well and done, I'm fine. But then I was having severe anxiety. I cannot drive on the freeway. I was having full out panic attacks. They were putting me in unsafe situations. I was having such, and for no reason. These were not even related to anything I had actually. Okay, sorry, driving does, yes, driving.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the things, like I never had somebody break into the house when I was a kid, and all of a sudden here I am being just so paranoid that every sound was literally an axe murderer. That's all I could think. And it would send me into actual full out panic attacks. And my poor husband is, seeing this, and he finally said, honey, you need to go see a therapist because I think that what happened with your mom really messed you up and you need
Mm-hmm.
to go talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay. And at that time, we were also dealing with finding out that we were infertile. We were not going to be able to have kids. And so that was something else I was dealing with. And I said, okay, fine. I guess, my mom's situation, that doesn't bug me. But you're right. Maybe not being able to have kids is affecting me. Maybe it's being married. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I go in and I start talking to this therapist. And I love this guy. He's this old guy with a ponytail, total hippie.
Right on.
He was wearing flip flops when I met him. I just love this guy. My therapist was amazing. And he starts asking me all these questions. And I'm going, well, yeah, my mom hit me. And yeah, I went through this abuse. And then all of a sudden, as we're talking about it, I had actually never remembered all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I had never experienced flashbacks or nightmares until I was in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say that to worry anybody, but that is unfortunately one of those things that it would have come out eventually. And it was so much better that it was coming out in a safe environment with somebody who knew what they were doing and
Mm-hmm.
could give me the tools of how to breathe, how to relax. I was on medication. I actually was on medication for a while for anxiety, and I had a second medication for when panic attacks would hit me
Mm-hmm.
because he knew, hey, as we're uncovering all this stuff, this is something you're going to be dealing with. You're going to be going home and you're going to be remembering things that maybe you didn't remember before.
Yes.
And that was tough. I'm not going to lie. That was a very tough period of my time. And I was remembering all of this stuff. And all of a sudden I was starting to have flashbacks. I was starting to have those nightmares. I was starting to have that, but it was all there originally. It's hard to explain, but all of that was already there before I started seeing a therapist. The therapist just helped me kind of take it and process it. And I mean, again, we had 19 years of baggage to,
Mm-hmm.
unpack. It was intense. And once I kind of got past that, some of the things that, was still not really known was about hypervigilance. Hypervigilance
Mm-hmm.
was something that was really a lot of research was done at that time. That's something that I actually learned when I was in school, and why I now know about how child abuse can actually permanently affect your brain is because it was part of my trauma classes I actually had to take last year. So this is something I'm very aware of now that I now understand how to deal with. So hypervigilance is probably the one thing I still deal with. In pretty extreme cases, I no longer avoid places, which is another point that is stuff that a lot of people who are going through PTSD will deal with, is it will start avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
Our comment earlier about not being able to be long in a grocery store, that might be a trigger of, avoiding large crowds, or maybe things within the store, the lighting or whatever that affects you, you'll avoid. You will be more prone to substance abuse. You will be more prone to having hypervigilance, whether it's short term or long term. There is, and the biggest thing though is those flashbacks. Those flashbacks are really what take just a normal anxiety disorder to PTSD.
Yes.
So it's those flashbacks. So the flashbacks are the part that really start to kind of affect you. If you don't have those, you're kind of more in the realm of an anxiety disorder. You can have hypervigilance without having PTSD, but those flashbacks specifically is where we kind of get the our PTSD. And I do want to talk about hypervigilance, Matt, but I want to make sure that if there's anything you want to throw in really quick, but I do have a good example of what hypervigilance is.
Oh, I do too.
Okay, do you want to do yours first, and then I'll
not?
chime in? Mine's more educational.
Okay.
Than an actual example. I don't know.
Oh no. Yeah. So I call when I talk to veterans, I call it the scan and pan. You're scanning for potential threats. You're panning around with your head, kind of looking around, seeing where everybody is at and who sticks out of the crowd as far as who can be a threat. And it was really interesting. As one time, I was with my wife at Walmart, and this is when we first started dating. And I hate Walmart. I hated going to it before PTSD, and it just was even worse then because it was so damn crowded. It was just too many people. Well,
Wow.
and I had my phone with me, and so I was constantly looking down at my phone and just screwing around with my phone, and walking with her while she's going down the aisle. And then she's like, "Why are you on your phone so much?" And I says, and I didn't really want to tell her. And I says, "No, I'm sorry." And so I put my phone away, and then I started scanning and panning, right? And I'm looking and looking and looking and looking. And when we got back to the house, we unloaded the groceries, and we are just outside sitting. And she's like, was there something going on with you in Walmart? I says, "Well, let me tell you what's up." And then I said, when I'm at places like Walmart, I am looking at all of these people. And then I started going over this list. And this is really what drove the point home. I started giving her descriptions of people, about their potential height, what made them stood out of the crowd as far as a potential threat, and what they were doing, if this person looked like a risk assessment. I was doing all of this while walking through Walmart. So it wasn't like I was able to focus on just the shopping. It was everything. And I said, my phone is kind of like a grounding tool for me, because then I'm just focusing on what's going on my phone. And so I don't have to use all this bandwidth to acknowledge and security scan all these people. And so for me, that was like what hypervigilance meant to me, was that I could never focus on what was going on with myself. It was everything, and it's just an astronomical amount of just trying to remember details of each person.
That's a great description.
I'm just reading the chat right now. Got some really good comments that are coming in. Really appreciate that. So Hannah, you said you had something you wanted to talk about with hypervigilance.
Yeah, so with hypervigilance, and this is something that I learned with working with at-risk youth. And again, my perspective is always going to be on childhood trauma. It's going to have more of the long-term effects as far as what is going to happen with changes in the brain. So the example that we were given is when you are hypervigilant, or when you're not hypervigilant, when you're somebody who has not experienced trauma or prolonged trauma, your baseline is here. And what we call that baseline is we call that baseline homeostasis. And that just means it's kind of your where you sit on a normal, day when you're just chilling watching TV, when you're chilling on your phone. You're not really like super relaxed that you're falling asleep, but you're not super anxious. It's just kind of your normal state of being. So most people, this is where they're at. And so when you are starting to have something that's maybe going to trigger your anxiety, which is otherwise known as we like to call it our fight or flight, um, it takes, maybe a fight or flight response will be kind of up here for most people. Falling asleep is kind of down here. And most people sit on that wonderful right perfectly in the middle of it. So that if they're starting to get elevated into fight or flight, sometimes takes a little longer before, oh, and man, I need to freak out. I need to worry about that. I need to act. Then those people, you go down a little bit lower and it's kind of where you're dealing with if you're going to be going to sleep or relaxing or being in a fully meditated state. Somebody with hypervigilance, especially somebody who has experienced prolonged trauma and they actually have those changes in their brain, where instead of having that baseline be here, for a hypervigilant person, their baseline is actually going to be up here. Their state of rest is automatically on a higher anxiety level than a normal person. And so what happens if you're talking about that baseline or that threshold of anxiety, look how close you are to hitting that. And so that means that anything that's going to happen is going to trigger that. And this is something that my poor husband has to deal with, is that he'll walk into the house unannounced, and I mean, I will freak out. And I mean, I've actually gotten to the point where if he'll come home and I'm not expecting him home for some reason, I've actually been so startled, I will break out into tears.
Startle
and
response, yep.
And I'll just, because my fight or flight, just being that startled position, it's just like a deer in the headlights of a car, and I feel like there's no way out in that moment, and so I just panic. And so somebody who is in a hypervigilance, when they hit that anxiety state, when they hit that little threshold of anxiety, they're not able to process fight or flight right then. It's too fast. It's just too quick. You can't assess the situation before it hits. But then you also look at it, is if they're all the way down here, and most people who are at rest are down here, this is where your rest, they have a lot longer to go to before they actually hit a nice restful state. So something that is normal with people who have had issues with trauma is issues with sleeping. And everyone always attributes your issues to sleeping with having nightmares. And yes, that is the case. You will have maybe more nightmares, more flashbacks of trauma when you're asleep. However, what people don't tend to look at is there's more insomnia. And the reason is because if I'm laying in bed, my husband hits the pillow, he's out. I mean, seriously, I don't know how he does it. 2 minutes, he's gone, right?
You get
and
jealous.
Nothing will wake him up. Like, he's asleep. For me, I am so aware of everything around me. I'm aware of the car that just pulled up and the lights. I'm aware of every sound outside. I heard that the sprinklers just came on. I want to hear. I'm focused on all of that.
A lot of stimuli.
The cat jumps on. If the cat jumps on the bed, I'm like, the cat's on the bed. Like, I am now awake. And so getting to a level of being fully rested is really difficult. And so that's something that's hypervigilant. And now I do want to make this clarification. I talk about this in one of my blogs, which is an introvert. Introverts are also more aware of their environment. That's why they get overstimulated so much. Introverts don't not like parties. They just get overstimulated because they notice the fan. Like right now in my room, I notice the fan. I can hear a car outside. I'm aware of every light. I'm aware of how the light is bouncing off of that picture. Everything in my peripheral vision, I am aware of. That's also part of being an introvert. So if you're an introvert, you don't necessarily have PTSD.
Yeah.
The important.
Yeah, that's a good disclaimer there.
Yeah, the important part of this is you also have to have had trauma, and you also have to have. It's not just being aware of your environment. It's actually having a closer to a hitting an anxiety point in your environment. It's not just, oh, we know everything. Like you were saying, you were looking for threats.
Yes.
That's different than just saying, hey, I know what's going on in my, my basic space, my basic living space. You're actually looking for what could be a potential threat. somebody with hypervigilance like me, I may not be always looking for the threat, but I am going to be much more easily startled of something. If there is a threat, it's going to take a lot quicker for me to think something's a threat than not. And so that's where that anxiety comes in. That wonderful anxiety that people with PTSD deal with is because in our world, we realize that a lot of things can be threats that other people don't realize.
Yes, yes. And
So
if
we
you don't,
have, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, and that brings up a really important topic. Two things. In the military, they talk about it and they call it situational awareness. Now, that's a really important thing to have when you're out there in the war zone. But when you're walking through Walmart and you're walking through, let's say, a museum with your family, you know, you don't. That's where the whole hypervigilance and the situational awareness becomes an issue, and it starts to interfere in your day to day life and your functioning. And so a lot of people say, well, the military taught me to do this, and now it's become worse. And where's what can I do about it? And I always talk about it. So well, that's what we're here to work about. You know, your hypervigilance. And then the other thing that I want, yeah, absolutely. And then let's take a look at that the startle response. You know, it's clinical jargon, but it makes sense. Your startle response. You know, a lot of veterans out there who are, and not even just veterans, but a lot of people who have PTSD cannot stand the 4th of July. And they cannot stand it because every time.
I hate 4th of July for completely different reasons. If anybody wants to hear that story later, I will share it. But yeah, I hate 4th of July for completely different reasons. But yes, military definitely very affected.
Right, and I never forget the first time I was invited by my wife to hang out with her family to do fireworks, and I told her, I said I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm gonna be jumpy this whole time, and she, I don't know if she just didn't, she thought I was choking or something, and I just basically sat there for like 2 hours just jumping. Just, you know, I'd hear an explosion and I'm jumping, and they were just like, "What's going on?" You know, they all knew I was a war veteran, but by the time we left there, I was just a bundle of nerves and just kind of shaking because my startle response was just pinging for just too damn long, and it was just like, holy crap, that sucked. Now I will say that I've gotten better over the years, but I still have that startle response depending on what's going on. And here's the clicker. Here's the craziest thing. The house that I'm in right now is close enough to Fort Lewis McChord, which is a joint base between the Army and the Air Force, and they do howitzer practice. And for those of you who don't know, it's just big, huge cannon that makes a big boom. And I
grew
was
up
just
by Pendleton, so I know exactly what that
oh,
is.
and you just hear boom, and I was like, oh my god, okay, they're just practicing. I know it's this is nothing going on, but again, what it gets back to, and why I wanted to give you that example is the startle response. That's very, very much tied into PTSD and some of the reactions of it.
I do want to also make sure we had a comment that somebody actually tried. There are signs that you can put out in front of your house that ask you to be respectful. A veteran lives here, and the person who responded said that they didn't work. I just want to say, hey, to anybody out there who is watching who is not a veteran, please be respectful of our military. I hope that maybe this video will give you some sort of
Mm-hmm.
empathy for those who are going through that. With fireworks specifically, you have to remember, and these are some things that were brought up in chat. There is not only loud explosions, there is smells of gunpowder,
Yep.
there is bright lights, and all of these things can be very reminiscent of somebody who has dealt with a combat zone. And so their PTSD might either be just they're being startled with a startle response like a hypervigilance, but it also can trigger flashbacks,
Mm-hmm.
especially if whatever their trauma is experiencing based on those aspects, based on an explosion, a bright light, the smell of gunpowder, all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
you're not only sending them possibly into a just a trigger of being startled,
Yep.
you're also possibly triggering a flashback that can be very, very, very emotional for that individual. So please be respectful. If you are in an area like Southern California in an apartment zone in the middle of when we are having a drought and we are in a high fire zone and you're
Yes.
not supposed to be putting off fireworks, please don't.
Yeah.
We have tons of military, especially in our area. I grew up by Camp Pendleton in Oceanside. I am currently by Miramar. Literally, I can see Miramar air shows
Wow.
from my house. So this is a very, in my area, we have, and that's not even talking about the naval base, down in actual downtown. So, I huge respect for the military, and especially in areas like that, when you know that there's a lot of military in your area, please be respectful. And also, a side note, just about Fourth of July, dogs and cats are also
Mm-hmm.
affected. So
Oh,
just
yes.
don't be jerks. Let's just go with that. Don't be a jerk.
And
This 4th of July, I beg you, be kind to those that live around you because you do not know what they're going through. And
yeah, absolutely.
I'm getting off of my soapbox now. I'm sorry. That's something that drives me crazy. I have a grandfather that was in the Navy. I have a cousin who is a Marine. I have a brother-in-law who's a Marine. I mean, again, growing up next to Pendleton, I have a lot of military friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
Grew up in a military town, and so please, it's something that I saw so many of my friends and family struggle with throughout 4th of July, and don't be.
Let me talk about real quick why what I do. Okay, and there it's different for everybody, but as far as how they work through the Fourth of July, my actual last day or my last night in Iraq was the Fourth of July. So
Wow.
so it has kind of a different meaning for me too. But what I generally do is what I like to do is basically have a big old barbecue in the daytime and just have family over or whatever, have a big old barbecue, and then and we'll just be out there socializing. But once we start hearing the fireworks going off, then we all
Mhm.
go inside, shut all the windows so it kind of dampens the noise, and then we'll watch a movie. And we'll watch a movie, and I got these really big tower speakers and subwoofers and whatnot, so it's super loud. And I just watch a movie. I don't hear anything but the movie for the most part. And then if it's still going on, maybe I'll jump on and play a game or something like that until it's time to go to bed. And so I would love people to have the same compassion as like you, Hannah, and every but realistically speaking, you know I don't see the whole neighborhood doing that, so I had to change something in my own way, the things that I can control, and I kind of came up with my own brew in terms of how to deal with the 4th of July. And if any of you folks out there listening right now have your own coping mechanism, let's hear it. And
Yeah, let's share it. Let's talk about that because that's great.
oh, here we go. Twist says that I put on my headphones and blare music. Well, there you go.
Love it. That's a
That's heck
great. See,
yes.
see, and that's the thing. So with hypervigilance, and this is where we have two different perspectives here going on because we have, for somebody who has been in the military, there might be more of a sidle response. There's that flashback. For somebody who is maybe like me, who's dealt with hypervigilance as a product of long-term trauma and abuse, my hypervigilance is actually more related to it being in a constant state growing up of fight or flight. And that's
Hmm.
where that fight or flight kind of comes in. And a, I'm getting some echoing back from Matt's thing. So
Sorry.
it's fine. It's throwing me off. Um, so what ends up happening is that you get into this fight or flight where you're constantly in that for your entire life. And it's good because it's actually a survival mechanism. That's what keeps you safe. Being able to be like, I like to think of it as a cheetah, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. So a cheetah, they are going to be very easily startled into running if there's danger. It's the same thing for somebody who has hypervigilance, is that being in that and being so close to that startle response means that you're able to react quicker. So growing up in my situation, there were days where I would see the situation start to go bad. my mom was starting to get into her mood, and I would automatically trigger into my startle response, and that actually helped me. Maybe it was get under the bed and hide. Maybe it was get out the window and run away. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it was try to diffuse the situation by being like, "Hey, I've got this like awesome idea of something we could watch." So that hypervigilance for me is just kind of always that being on edge of trying to make sure that whatever is going on around me is not going to be a threat. And some of that has actually translated into be kind of a people person or a people pleaser, because there's that constant idea if somebody gets mad, they could hurt me. If somebody gets angry, I could be in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And so growing up in that environment, everything was done in order to keep me safe. And so the hypervigilance then translates as an adult to kind of the same idea of if there was an intruder in the house, I would respond very, very quickly because I would already be ready to go because I'd already be in a heightened state. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd already have that adrenaline because that's the thing that happens, by the way, with your fight or flight. So what happens with your fight or flight is you actually have a trigger of your adrenaline. And so that makes you faster, stronger, more aware. And so that's what keeps you safe in a situation where you're being threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just have an easier trigger to hit that, which by the way is exhausting. Anybody who is on here who has had issues with especially long-term abuse, that's where the brain is actually physically changed, is because I have a much quicker response to having actual adrenaline being rushed into my system. And so when you're a kid and you are being exposed to trauma frequently over and over again, you're constantly having adrenaline pumping through your body.
Yes.
And that actually alters your brain. That's why it's long term. Um, and so, yeah, so those are things. So I love though that you gave your example of how to help. For me, my husband has to deal with a lot. And one of my things that I always know when I'm starting to get to that point where I'm getting a little too high is that I tend to clench my jaw. And so I started just noticing every once in a while when I would start to clench my jaw, big breath in and out with my mouth open, because by the way, little trick, if you're a jaw clencher like me, if you open your mouth, it is physically impossible to clench your jaw.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you breathe through your mouth, you are relieving that muscle, you're relieving your neck muscles, you're relieving your shoulder muscles because you're not clenched up like that. And so that's something. Music, I use a lot of music.
Mm-hmm.
My husband has to walk me through some things frequently of, okay, calm down. You're fine. Everything's okay. You don't need to be frazzled. What can I do to help? And that's what he always looks at me and says, what can I do to support you through this?
Mm-hmm. Great.
And so this goes back to the question we had earlier about how can you deal with somebody, what to say when someone's having PTSD. To be honest, there's nothing right to say. There's no magic words you can say,
Yep.
because unless you've been through trauma and it's the same trauma that somebody else's has been through, you don't understand. Like Matt and I, we can relate on some levels, but even just because our trauma is different, we're not going to really be able to 100% understand each other.
Right.
So don't try to just sit there and understand somebody with PTSD. Listen.
Yep.
Maybe you won't get it, but listen. And then when they're having a hard time, ask, how can I support you?
Yep.
They can't think because they're in a very stressed out. My brain will just go completely fuzzy and I just shut down and I just can't even think. In those moments, don't push that person. Don't, hey, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think? What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Poof, what do you need? Poof, what do you Aladdin moment. Just sit back, wait for them to be okay, give them a second. Sometimes it takes a few minutes for them to come out of it a little bit to say, second thing, understand their triggers. My husband knows, I brought this up in our last stream, that there's a song by Disturbed that, and if anybody went and listened to it between the last 2 weeks, the uncut version, there is a part in the song that is very triggering to me. People in my world, they know that. So they'll make sure to, if that song comes on and they know that it's a song, if it's a version that has that part in the song, they will go ahead and they will just turn it off before that part of the song comes on. No one has to say anything. No one has to do anything. They just quietly know we're going to turn this off when it comes to that part. So knowing what somebody's triggers are, knowing how to just to just be with them and just not talk and just listen, or just be there as a support and be comfortable with the silence that's sometimes going to happen with that. Those are probably some, at least my advice about some of the things that can be very beneficial.
We got a really interesting response here
Amazing.
from Drunken Veteran. One thing I used to focus on is something I could see, something I could hear, something I could
I
smell.
love that you bring this up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is an
Mm-hmm.
actual grounding technique that's
Yes.
called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It is focusing on your environment and grounding yourself. I will, if you want, I'll post that later. I actually wrote an entire blog about relaxation techniques,
Nice.
and one of them is this method. Yeah, it gets you,
Absolutely.
snaps you back into reality. It's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you want to look that up, there's great guides online. Thank you so much, Drunken Veteran, for bringing that up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm thinking, looking at the time here, because we talked a lot about the flight or fight response. We talked about how the adrenaline system it becomes activated during all this stuff. Um, if I would like to, unless you had wanted to jump in with something else, I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the biology of PTSD. How does that sound?
Yeah, I'm fine with biology. There's really only one more topic I wanted to talk about today that I think is important. So yeah, I'm cool with that.
Okay, so let's start off with the adrenaline. So, uh, the adrenaline is what we need when we are in that fight or flight response because we are either, as it says, we're going to either be running or fighting. And then there's also the third one, which is called freezing, but we often just kind of talked about fight or flight.
Yeah,
Adrenal,
the freeze is when I go blank. I don't
yeah,
think I illustrated that properly. I apologize.
no, it was good. And so what happens to that adrenaline? And again, I'm bringing the perspective of the adults and the research that I've done. We there's a term called adrenal fatigue, and for anyone who's had that fight or flight response and or that really harsh reaction, when you start to go back to your homeostasis, if you might feel a drop below it where you're tired, you feel just like really like almost like you're sick. We call that adrenal fatigue. Now, on that same token, and this is the reason why I'm bringing this up, unspent adrenaline in the circulatory system will start to become plaque. And what will happen is that if you get enough of that plaque buildup, you will have heart issues. And a lot of the veteran populations of who are a little bit older, who were like in the Vietnam Wars or the first Desert Storm War, a lot of them experience a lot of heart problems, and this is one of the reasons why. It's because that plaque builds up, and it just sits there, and the only way you can really turn that around is just exercise, and then of course your diet and stuff like that. Um, I think when we talk about the actual biological effects of PTSD, it's important to understand this because a lot of people think it's just purely in the mind, that it has no real effect on the rest of your body, but that is not true. One message that I think Hannah and I have both tried to pound into today's stream is that it affects a lot of parts of your body.
Everything.
It's the invisible wound, and it truly is. The invisible wound
Which is why we call it an injury,
Uh-huh.
not an illness.
That's right. That's right. And so I want to bring up this. I had a couple of pictures that Hannah put up. Again, she handles our social media, and she came up and found some really good material about PTSD. But I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover everything. So I'm going to bring up only one, and let me bring it up right now. Hold on one second.
Yeah, and so while you're bringing that up, that's kind of why with childhood abuse that it affects your brain is you actually don't ever hit that point. You don't actually ever crash.
Mm-hmm.
Crashing could mean death. So you constantly stay in that cycle of somewhat aroused to highly aroused to somewhat aroused to highly aroused all the time.
Yeah.
Which is why it has actual changes in the brain. Yeah.
So
Oh, I love this.
yeah,
Yeah, I love this this image, especially for the bottom part that I think we need to address.
absolutely. So I don't want to overwhelm anybody with talking about the brain, but I'm going to give you a quick example of why this is important. So let's say you're sitting there on your TV and you're watching some sort of animal adventure where you see like some guys out there video filming this wildlife, and you see the gazelle sitting there with his or her group, and they're just kind of eating some leaves. They're just kind of chill, laid back. Their homeostasis is pretty low right now. They're feeling good. They don't feel like they're in any kind of danger. And let's say off in the distance, the camera pans off to this lion. Okay, this big, huge lion, and he or she is ready to pounce on them and eat them. Well, these gazelles will immediately see the lion coming after them, and they become alert. You see their heads pop up, and they take action, and they run and they run and run. And when they feel that they have outrun the lion, they feel safe, and so their homeostasis goes right back down. Animals like that don't get PTSD, and this is the difference between that gazelle, and I hope you're staying with me on this, and us, is that we have what's called, I'm trying to figure out a best way to put it. We have higher brain function. There you go. That's an easier way to say it. Our brains can do a lot more than what a gazelle can do, and we have the neocortex, for example. It's the higher brain function that gives us the PTSD, because we feel like we need to constantly feel safe. The gazelle, once the threat is clear, it's good to go. It doesn't even think twice about it. But as humans, we don't. We are constantly trying to find out ways to keep ourselves protected, and that's what the PTSD does. So if we go back to this picture, you'll see the areas that shrinks. There's areas that have an increase in activity, like the amygdala. And something that's very, very important, and I've done a lot of studies on this, was the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, and where it governs our judgment, our emotional regulation. Really important part of the brain that we use or depend on to really interact with the rest of the world. And again, I'm only talking and referencing to adults, but with the plasticity of the brain, we see these changes, and they can shift. There is change in movement, potential of change in movement of certain areas of the brain. Hannah, you wanted to talk about that last part?
Yeah, so just so that those who are not visualizing this, are not seeing the picture, if we do turn this into a podcast someday, we have a area of the brain. I'm just going to go through the basic points. So we have areas that shrink that are related to past and present memories. That is where we can get things like our flashbacks and having those nightmares, because we're not able to distinguish what those memories are versus what is happening right now. We're going to have issues with emotional processing, so such as our fear response, and that is something that is going to be that heightened response of being able to go from everything's a danger, everything's a danger, everything's a danger, because you're not really able to process those emotions or that fear response like a normal person would, because everything is triggering, everything is more emotional, everything is
Mm-hmm.
causing that kind of that issue. And then we also have um, regulates negative emotion that occurs with specific, when confronted with specific stimuli. That is also the same thing of what are we having, what are those fear responses. But then at the bottom, what this illustrates is that these are changes in the chemistry of the brain. And so the treatments for this are CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or we have EM. Geez, I'm dyslexic, by the way, so reading letters sometimes is really fun. EMDR, and that is I. You're gonna have to help me with this one. Eye movement
Movement, desensitization.
desensitization. R. Crap.
I think it's rehearsal.
Is it rehearsal?
Oh
I always get
crap!
confused whether it's
Now I'm
rehearsal.
wondering. Hold on.
Sorry, I always get confused if it's rehearsal or reflex.
Reprocessing. The R
Reprocessing.
is reprocessing.
I was wrong on those accounts. See, check that out. This is, by the way, not what I do. I do CBT. I can tell you all about cognitive behavioral therapy.
And I do
It's
solution focused.
which, by the way, is not a treatment for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is that these types of things, and you can change the picture back whenever you
All
want.
right.
I just wanted to be able to read that. The reason that these are listed is because they both have to do with processing. So when we're dealing with trauma, the best way to deal with your trauma is
Oops.
to process. Yeah, that's our intro. Cool.
Why is it doing
We're,
that?
we're
Sorry, guys.
starting again. Yay! So we are dealing with processing your trauma. This is the same reason why if you are somebody who is working in a helping field, like a first responder, one of the best ways to do is to just talk about it. What did you experience? What did this look like? So when you're dealing with trauma in general, it's the types of methods that we use to deal with trauma typically have to do with um, talking about what you've been through. So, such as a narrative. Geez, I cannot talk all of a sudden. Your picture just threw me off. A narrative, being able to create a narrative on your experiences, being able to process what you've been through different methods. Those are typically the most efficient ways to deal with trauma. We have a question: solution focus. Solution focus is essentially, and you can add what you want. Solution focus is exactly that. It's focusing on the solution rather than necessarily focusing on the past,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily focusing on what the problem is that has led to the issue. It's more dealing with how to move forward from the issue.
Yes, you were a very good summary. Solution focus, basically, it's postmodern theory, which basically means that we as people create our own reality. And so what it tries to do is separate the person from like the PTSD. It tries to say that you are not PTSD. You are your own individual type of person, and we are going to focus on what life would be like for you if you the PTSD wasn't there. What are some of the positive things? And solution focus is very positive orientated. What are some of the things that you will notice going on in your life that shows that PTSD no longer is a part of you and you are starting to experience life more to its fullest? It's called brief for a reason because you can start seeing a change within the first two sessions. It really depends on what's going on. I'm not trying to get on a soapbox about solution focus, but what appealed to me about it was that when I was seeing the veteran population, sometimes I'd see them for 20, 30 sessions. Sometimes I only see them for 5. So I figured I needed something that's going to be quick, that gets them on the right path as soon as possible. And so it just kind of made sense for me. Now, with that being said, I don't exclusively use one theoretical practice, and most clinicians don't. So I
No.
use
I
CB.
use solution focus
Yeah,
too.
I use
I just don't use
CBT.
solution focus for trauma.
Right, and I use other stuff for trauma as well. A lot of mindfulness, grounding techniques. Most we call it being eclectic, and that's basically we are going to use whatever theory that's going to help the client.
Yeah, so and that's one of those things about with solution focus, and the reason why it's not so common as a treatment for PTSD is that, and this is where the difference between it being a one-time situation or something like
Mm-hmm.
a combat-related trauma versus a long-term trauma. So just to give the example of when you're dealing with somebody like me who has gone through 19 years of abuse, the last thing that you should probably be saying to that client is, let's not talk about what you went through because we
Yeah.
need to just like separate yourself
Yeah.
from the past. We need to focus on what you're going to do now. Okay, well, that's really freaking fine for you, but guess what? I have 19 years of trauma here,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of processing of because when you're dealing with trauma that is related to such things as abuse, you're not just dealing with the physical acts of violence, you're dealing with guilt, you're dealing with a lot of issues with with mood. You are a lot of times depressed, you're having anxiety. There's a lot to kind of unpack there. And so something like a cognitive behavioral that is going to focus more on a narrative approach, an exposure approach, a talk therapy, a processing, which is all cognitive behavioral, CBT is, and they actually have TF, which is trauma focused CBT, and all it does is it really adds kind of making sure you're doing all of the relaxation techniques. So if anybody out there is having PTSD and you are worried about going to a therapist because you're like, oh my gosh, Hannah said that it's so difficult to talk about it because they just want you to talk about all this trauma and it can trigger your trauma. Here's the part about the trauma focus CBT is they actually give you all of your coping skills, relaxation techniques that you need before you start unpacking all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started it, I learned breathing exercises. I learned grounding techniques like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I learned visualization. I was already, if I needed medication, I was already on medication before we even started talking about any of it. So trauma focus specifically says, we know we're going to be dealing with trauma. We know that trauma could be triggering. We're going to give you all of the necessary tools you need before we start actually getting into tell me your story.
Yeah.
Let's talk about these events. I have done exposure therapy with clients where I've had them very, very specifically put themselves back into a situation and give me details. What did you see when you're in that situation? Tell me word for word. And that can be really tough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking them to relive it with me in therapy. And that's really hard. So what you give them all the tools. And the second that I see a client starting to go over where they're not able to handle it, okay, we're going to go back to our techniques. What do you feel? What do you see? What are you thinking? And I start to ground them and bring them back in. So don't be afraid of going to a therapist and starting to unpack all of this because that's what they're there for. They'll have given you the tools you need
Yep.
in order to deal with it. Unlike solution, which is somebody who kind of like they're already aware of their trauma, they already know that they've experienced this. They already kind of have told their story. They don't really need to talk about it again. But now they're just kind of going, well, what do I do? So that's how like a trauma person can be helped by solution is because they're just having a hard time now moving on from it.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody who has never dealt with their trauma at all, I highly recommend seeking something that is more like a cognitive behavioral approach, or I honestly don't know about EMDR that much other than I knew a colleague once that used it, but it can be useful. It uses some of the same processing and desensitization of it. It's very useful. But yeah, so that's just my little disclaimer of those who are currently going through this. That's why, solution focus is great, but it should be used only after you've actually processed the trauma you have experienced. And I've actually with clients switch tactics with the same client. It's like, okay, well, today we're using, this.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna process. We're gonna use, we're gonna be using a narrative approach for your trauma, and then 5 or 6 sessions once we've kind of unpacked all that processing, all of a sudden we're starting to lose more solution focus of saying, hey, let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do now? What are some goals? Cognitive behavioral actually does have goals. It's a very big part of cognitive behavioral is to set goals that are achievable that you can try to reach to. So it has some of the same ideas as solution focus. It just is more designed to process what you've been through and focus on the past. So that's why it's different. So I just, for those in the chat who are talking about therapy right now, I wanted to make sure you understood.
Great. So we're getting close to approaching the last half hour of the show. I was just kind of thinking, you know, when we talk about one thing that's worth noting, and this is not exclusive to just veterans. It's just for anybody who have PTSD. TBI. We've talked about TBI in the past with traumatic brain injury, like football players, sports players, people who are in injury or not injuries, who are injured in car accidents, assaults. Anyone can get, TBI. And one
Mhm.
thing they found that was really um, interesting but also troubling is that TBI pretty much affects the same parts of the brain as PTSD. And in fact, a lot of people who were deployed who experienced like a IED, a roadside bomb, or an explosion, the people who are trying to do the diagnosis have a tough time separating the two. And
Mhm.
so when we talk about, and this is again what I see a lot that's happening is this misinformation. People are more accepting of somebody having traumatic brain injury than they do of someone who has PTSD. That's the stigma. That's the ignorance of not knowing. But they'll say, "Oh, you got traumatic brain injury. Your brains are all jacked up from what happened to you." And then they'll hear people say, "Well, you got PTSD. It's just all in your head." Well, once again, I bring this up because I'm trying to really hammer in that it's a wound in your it's a physical wound that happened, and PTSD and TBI, it's the same almost, you
Yeah.
know. And I just wanted to bring that up before we refocus. And Hannah, you said that you wanted to close out with a specific topic before after biopsych.
Yeah, so I just and this is something that's more on the social area. We've kind of
Mm.
gone through, cognitive, emotional, and now social. Huh?
Yeah.
And yeah, I just realized we kind of did that. So one of the things that is very important for people, and this is also very much more. Actually, it's not. I'm gonna stop myself before I say this because that's actually wrong. What I was about to say. So those who have been traumatized, there is a thing called re-traumatization. And that is something I wanted to bring up because, especially when we see it in our younger populations, what re traumatization is it means that those who have experienced trauma are actually have a higher chance of experiencing trauma again. And the reason for that comes down to maladaptive coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use the term maladaptive coping mechanisms because I don't want to say things like you just messed up, like you just don't know how to handle your life, because that's not what it is. It's maladaptive coping mechanisms means that what you're doing in order to cope with your trauma is actually doing more to hurt you than help you. So, for instance, substance abuse,
Mm-hmm.
something we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but we really didn't get into, is that those who are dealing with trauma, sometimes it's easier to use substances because it numbs the pain. It might help you sleep. It might help you do whatever it is. Let's say you're not sleeping a lot, so then in the morning, your only way to get through your day is to have a lot of medication that maybe makes you more awake. Um, and I don't mean coffee as a coffee addict over here. That's not what I mean. I mean like actual, like maybe illegal substances or things that will help you forget or whatever. Those are things that you might do that can say have other adverse effects. So a good example is I'm going to bring up somebody who has like been raped. So somebody who has been raped, maybe they start to cope with that by drinking. Well, now all of a sudden they're at a party, they're drinking, they are, using drugs, and they're not being very safe because they're participating at this point in very risky behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so by dealing and having those risky behaviors that they're doing, they're now putting themselves in a position where they could be traumatized again. They could be raped again. They may be robbed. They may be roofied. They may have all these different things that happen. Same with somebody who has experienced abuse growing up. Somebody who experienced abuse growing up may not understand what love is. They may not understand what caring is. These are things that maybe they've never experienced in their life. And so when they get into relationships, they equate violence with love. And so now that person, because of these maladaptive coping skills, they're just seeking love, love, love. Anybody who will love me. They might have to deal with something like an unwanted pregnancy. They might
Mm-hmm.
end up with somebody who is also abusive. So that is one of those things why it's really important that when we're dealing with trauma, we are seeking the help we need because you may think, okay, well, my trauma is over and this is helping me today. But the problem is that what is not helping you is that it might be pulling you into other maladaptive issues that might have other effects. Now, this could also mean things like losing your job or,
Mm-hmm.
things like that as well. But the thing that I'm focusing on is not really kind of those things, because anybody who's going through that stuff can have those problems. I'm looking at more specifically the re-traumatization of performing risky behaviors that put you in a higher risk of having to deal with another traumatization in the future. Again, whether it's a sexual assault, an unwanted pregnancy, a a violent act, a normal assault, I guess, a unhealthy relationship, that you are being hurt within a relationship because you are not willing to get out of that situation. And I bring that up because I just hate that when people look at these things, they always kind of equate it to like that idea of, well, look at what she was wearing or things like
Mm-hmm.
that. We kind of get this idea of why are you being risky? Why are you going to parties and not being safe while you're there? And a lot of times it's because people just don't know how to get help. They don't know how to say, hey, I've had a problem. And so the reason I wanted to bring up this specific area of trauma is because working with at-risk youth, I saw a lot of this. I saw a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them going into being in gangs, or being victims of sex trafficking, to then being in unhealthy relationships that resulted in unwanted pregnancies or other abusive relationships. And again, this is way more common in somebody who has had something like child abuse. This is because these are more maladaptive skills you've grown. Yes, these can happen with things like combat related, obviously, but I bring it up just because I want to make sure that people understand that these are things that could also further impact your life. And so getting help is a very important thing. We've talked a lot about what to look for or what it looks like, but I think it's also really important to kind of drive that nail in of why it's important to get the help. Is it's not just, hey, I don't like to be in big crowds, or
Mm-hmm.
hey, 4th of July is uncomfortable for me, or I don't like to drive on the freeway. It's more than that. It can actually lead to maladaptive skills that could lead to further traumatization. And so to seek help, to seek a professional who knows how to deal with trauma, to process trauma, is very important. And something that it's so frustrating when people don't seek help because of stigma.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I recently, and I hoping she's not watching, actually, one of my good friends,
Uh-huh.
um is talking about some stuff she experienced with trauma, and somebody who was very close to her then telling her, well, you need to stop using this as a crutch.
Oh. Oh.
And I had to actually
Hell
stop,
no.
and I had to say, I'm just letting you know right now, I am very angry. And by the way, this is how I am as a counselor too. If you ever want to know, I don't really go with the whole non-disclosure aspect. I'm kind of the person that will tell my client exactly what I'm thinking at that moment. So I'm the same with my friends. I'm
A
like,
little
I'm
Carl
actually
Rogers.
very angry right now. What you just told me has really frustrated me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to need to just let you know that I'm very angry, and I'm going to have to compose myself for a second before I respond to that. Because
Mm-hmm.
if I respond right now, it is going to be in the form of wanting to slap somebody. And that's not probably the best thing for me to be doing in this situation. Um, and so that idea that it's a crutch. And so people don't want to get help because they're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, or they're embarrassed of what it's going to mean, or all these things. But the problem is that if we've been through some of these different traumas, we could be having patterns in our life that are maladaptive and could lead to additional trauma.
Yeah, and I would like to jump in there. That was a really really strong example, and my story is very similar in that nature of how people view PTSD. I remember I remember it was just like, yeah, like it was yesterday. I was out of the military. I was working in the civilian world. The PTSD was just completely unhinged as far as how I was not really working with it. It was working me. Um, my
I
family,
like the way you put that. That's so true.
yeah, and my family back home, I had visited them, and they noticed that there was something wrong. Something was going on. They said, and they called my in-laws, and they said, just something going on with Matt. There's he ain't the same. He's not the way he was before he left for the military. I was a pretty happy-go-lucky, smiling all the time, laughing all the time type of person. But when I came back from the war, I was pretty much pretty angry, chip on the shoulder, pretty stoic and boring. I mean, I just didn't really want to do anything. But anyhow, my in-laws, their tactic and I'm just going to say it, was really to sweep things under the rug. And I say this because we need to break the stigma of PTSD and mental health anyways, as a whole. And so when you sweep things under the rug, you are just basically saying, we're not going to acknowledge it. And so when my parents and when my family from California called my in-laws about expressing them being worried, they says, oh, he's fine now. He talked about it to us, and he's fine now. He no longer has PTSD. They literally said that because I talked about it, I no longer had PTSD. And they were sweeping that all under the rug and basically, in a sense, saying that the hell that you went through is so unimportant that we're not going to even acknowledge that you're dealing with this. And the struggles that you have that come with it. You're fine. Just keep your mouth shut. You're good. You don't have PTSD anymore. And that's basically what they were saying. And I was just like, whoa.
Oh yeah, I have very similar experiences with that. I'm pretty sure that most of my family doesn't actually acknowledge that I ever went through any trauma at all, or that I was abused. And it's, one of my favorite things that people will tell me is, wow, what you just said is really uncomfortable to me. It's really uncomfortable hearing about, being abused. That's not something I want to hear about. And I'm just like, well, I'm sorry. I don't really care what you want to hear. This is the truth of the reality. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with having trauma. It was done to me.
Yes.
That's not something to be ashamed of. I didn't ask for it. I didn't do anything to deserve it. If let's say you're in the military, you didn't ask for it. It happened to you. And there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of with that. It's who you are. And I like to look at it as that this has given me a lot in my life of feeling like I want to make sure that everything I went through wasn't in vain. And that's why I do what I do. And so I talk about it very openly with clients, and I talk about it very openly in public speaking. I've mentioned this last session. I've actually talked about it in front of schools, and there's nothing more unnerving than standing in front of a group of freshmen and saying, that's the day that my mom tried to kill me, and then have their hands raised up and ask questions, by the way. High schoolers have no tact. But if there's anything that we can kind of leave with the audience today, is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with having experienced trauma.
Right.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having issues afterwards. It was something that happened to you that was really bad, and you now have to deal with that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah, my family, if this is who I think it is, actually, yes, my family is in denial, and they need to deal with it. And hi, by the way, thanks for tuning in. I think that's a friend of mine.
Cool.
But no, that's the truth is, in this person is right, is that my family doesn't want to deal with it, because it makes people uncomfortable. And I'm sorry, but I don't care if it makes them uncomfortable. So yeah, so people here who are dealing with trauma, please get help, seek help, because there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. There is nothing weak about trauma. What it means is you're a survivor.
That's right. You're a fighter.
There's something on Twitter that somebody says, how did your life experience with mental health, what has it taught you today?
Mm-hmm.
And my response was that I'm a survivor, because I think that it is pretty impressive to have gone through what I did and to still be here today. And on like my graduation caps, I actually put Disney quotes. And my most recent graduation with my master's, I put on there, "It's kind of fun to do the impossible." And no one really got why that was important, except for, some people who really knew my story.
Mm-hmm.
And because growing up, I was just told that success in literally everything I'm doing right now was impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't worth it. I wasn't good enough. I came from an abusive family, so therefore I was raised in poverty. So success in life was just not an option for me. I believe my own father even said, I don't know what you're going to do in life, because you're not cut out for working. You can't deal with people. You're not smart enough. They wouldn't give me money for helping to apply to college because I wasn't worth it.
Mm.
Um, and so then I turned around, and how I'm in a doctorate program and all that stuff. So I say, well, to do the impossible is kind of fun, because
Mm-hmm.
it was always impossible for me, and yet here I am doing it. And, I say that not because so people can say, "Oh my gosh, you're so amazing and how awesome you are," but just because I want to make sure people understand that even if you've gone through this, it doesn't make you lesser. It doesn't make you unworthy because you're a survivor.
And it's funny, not funny, interesting. It was the cancer. When I got cancer, is kind of what changed my perspective on things. A lot of people say that they're a cancer survivor. You know, and I kind of got in this jokingly thing where I put I was a cancer fighter or a cancer warrior. And
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to obviously overgloss the impact of getting it, but it's like it's like I'm gonna say I'm a PTSD warrior or fighter because you know for me it just kind of changes it into it's just my own logical way of looking at it because I feel like I'm trying every day to kick the ass of PTSD or back when I had cancer and going through chemo and stuff like that, I was trying as hard as I can to curb stomp this cancer that was all over. So
Exactly.
everybody has if it's positive, I am all for it. You know what I'm saying when
Mhm.
it comes to how we clarify or how we describe um, PTSD or anything else. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, right there. Hey, Jinx, you owe me a Coke. No, and that's the thing is, and I'm reading the chat right now, and I'm seeing some stuff, not a victim, and a lot of very
Mm-hmm.
positive support coming through.
Yes. Thank you,
And I
everybody.
hope that what we're saying today does actually make an impact for people, because it is we're right now in PTSD awareness. And what's funny is that even in PTSD awareness, I'm not seeing a lot of awareness um,
Mm-hmm.
with some of the stuff that I'm seeing being shared. And I think that we need to we need to start breaking that stigma. And it's something I brought up in our last stream, is the issue with trauma is that nobody wants to talk about it. It's
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so people, they might talk about the symptom of saying, "Oh yeah, PTSD is so important." But who is really willing to talk about what causes PTSD? And who is willing to talk about it more for than a combat, a military personnel, a first responder, somebody who's dealt with abuse. They'll only say those words, but they don't really listen to the victims who have done these things and who have turned their being a victim into being a survivor. They don't listen to those stories because then it makes them uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't encourage people to be like Matt and I, who have not. This is my other little disclaimer. Hannah Talks. Instead of TED Talks, we're doing Hannah Talks right now. Um, I do not recommend that if you have not processed your trauma to go and start just sharing it on social media.
Right.
You're probably not going to get a lot of positive feedback, and so that could be very damaging. Second is it could bring up some stuff for yourself that could be very emotional and harmful personally. And third is if people then want to ask you advice, you may not be in a position to give proper advice to those individuals because you yourself have not gone through it
Mm-hmm.
as far as the healing and the therapy. So, although I do not recommend that those who have not processed their trauma talk about their trauma, I do recommend that if you are like Matt and I, you are a mental health professional, or you are somebody who has seen their story as a survival and now you are working it. You're not being worked by it. Now you are working it. Please share your stories. Talk about it. Share it on social media. Make sure these next few, I believe we have like 2 weeks left of PTSD Awareness Month. Please share it. Go out there and make people a little uncomfortable, I guess is what I'm asking. As mean as that is.
Yes. Well, since we're down to about the last 10 minutes of our stream, uh, Hannah, any last things you want to recap on us for today's? I'm going to start throwing out links, everybody, to our various social media that we have. I
Please
encourage.
follow.
Yes, please follow, please share, help get the word out. We're trying to build an audience here and getting our trying to do everything that we can to tear down the stigmas of mental health and promote positive awareness of it. So everybody who's here today, I would greatly appreciate it. Plus, another shout out to Hannah with handling how many social media things are you handling right now at one time, including your own stuff?
I'm up to 13.
Oh my gosh. I got Facebook and the Twitters, and that's about all I can handle.
Yeah, I was telling him earlier that I feel like it's giving me a little bit of a split personality because I'm having to post about myself to myself at this point.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to get, all of our, because like I said, I try to make sure our social media, and you can do what you need to with posting your links. Um, but I try to make sure to get very like all of our media is all interchanging, and if something Matt posts on Facebook, I'll try to share it. If there's something that I have, I'll try to share it, and so that everything's kind of integrated. And so yeah, so having to post about yourself to yourself and then tag yourself is really weird. So I'm kind of getting he doesn't have my blog links as far as the specific links I am talking about right now, unfortunately, and I do not have access to share them. But if you have my
I'll
Facebook,
bring it up.
yeah, if you have my Facebook or my website, which he is posting now, you can go into notes or you can go into blog, and you'll be able to find the blogs that I have talked about today. It will be under relaxation techniques, is specifically the one about relaxation techniques, as well as just some other really cool ones. I've got stuff up there about grief, about introvert, about dyslexia. It's a really fun one where I talk about wanting to be Indiana Jones. So if that piques your interest, check it out. I also talk about mental health awareness as well as a lot of guides about how to start counseling. And so, if you are in one of those people that doesn't know how to, Side Streams does not have their own website. We only have our own Facebook site and our own Twitter. I paid for my website personally, and we do not have a fund yet to do this. We are not paid for this, you guys. So, FYI, if you ever want to know this, I also have a Patreon. The Patreon I have personally goes also to Psi Streams as far as being able to promote our content. As far as being able to, like, on Facebook, you can promote things by creating an ad. That's where that money goes. It goes to help me be able to go to conventions, to speak, or to network. So we have all that, but no, unfortunately, Psi Streams does not have their own website
Oh,
yet.
holy crap! That was a big URL.
Wow, what was that?
I was trying to promote your web page.
Oh yeah, that's not right.
No.
That must have copied over weird. I don't even know if that will link. My website though is Serene Life Consulting. All one word, pretty easy, and you can access it from the Facebook, from the Twitter, from the Instagram, from the Pinterest, from the YouTube, from the everywhere. Um, so I highly recommend.
All right. That was
Yeah,
the
this is
epic fail on my part.
whatever, it happens. So yeah, check us out on all of those. And I just want to put this out there: we love comments. Likes are great, but shares, we need shares. We need our content to get out to people, because although we love that you're seeing our content, we're not friends with the whole world. And so if you share our material, we get to get out to then your friends, and then those friends will share it to those friends, and so on and so forth, until we have some sort of revenue where we can start actually boosting our posts to people who don't subscribe to us already. Because right now, I'm just bugging my friends and family.
Me
That's all
too.
I got. Yeah, so and they suck at helping, by the way. So those of you who are not my friends and family, um, helping us to to do that is very beneficial to get our shares out there. So yeah, please do that.
Hmm.
Please check us out and share, give us likes and all that jazz.
But
And yeah,
yeah, again, folks, I really appreciate you all being here. The support, to help us keep doing this. It's just it's heartwarming, and just to kind of let you folks know who are here right now, who are listening. Psi Streams, we're always are going to have a presence here at StackUp.org, but we are also going to be starting up our own personal stream page. I gave you the link right there. We're gonna use my old page on Twitch, and we're going to convert it to our Psi work. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to start. We're going to talk a little bit more about it in the future episodes. Looks like we got a follow. But I really, really appreciate everybody here. And Twiz, you awesome. Thank you for the follow. And like I said, we're going to be talking about this all the time in terms of mental health awareness. Please let us give us some topics as far as what to cover, what you would like to see. These giveaways that Hannah's been putting out there, we were getting some really cool feedback as far as some ideas and where to go, and that's exactly what we need. And that's pretty much it as far as I've got to talk about. Really important topic.
Really quick, so just so you guys know, those who are on here, in case you're not on our social media, our next topic is going to be the first weekend of July, and we are going to be talking specifically about stigma and support. That is something that I heard from a lot of people ask us to cover. So we're going to be specifically talking about what stigmas are out there and how to support those. I have a little blog I have kind of put up that's about mental health. It's called Mental Health Awareness, Representation, and Education and Why It Matters, if you're on the Facebook or my personal website. And yeah, Tool, awesome. And so if you go ahead and you check out you can also find that. That's something we're going to be talking about with stigma, and then talking specifically about how you can support your friends who are going through mental health issues.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're going to be doing in July, and so that's something to look forward to.
Heck yeah. All right, folks, I think, all right, I'll check out Discord. Thank you for the heads up. All right, folks, that's all we got for today. Again, appreciate the support. There we go. We always got to end it with that, with the heart hands.
My signature now.
It is. It's your sign off. I need to come up with a sign off or something. I don't know. But anyhow, again, everybody, I appreciate the love. I appreciate the support. And you guys are awesome. Just keep doing you. And
really quick answer of a question. The Patreon is set up, goes through me personally, and yes, I get 100% of it. So the only way to donate to Psi Streams currently is through the Patreon. I handle it, and I'm putting 100% of the proceeds back into my content as well as Psi Streams. So
good question.
Yeah, so giving to Patreon does go to me directly, but I use that money to support all of my content at the same time, which does include.
Good. All right, folks. Well, we are done for the day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to seeing you all again in our next stream. And in the meantime, please take care of one another. Take care of yourselves, and have a good one.
Happy 4th of July and happy Father's Day.
Goodbye.